Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, heads of state, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, on behalf of the President of the Republic of Chad, on behalf of my delegation, and in my personal capacity, I would like to convey my warm congratulations to Philemon Yang, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Cameroon, and congratulate him on his brilliant election to the presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly. I wish him every success in his work and assure him of the support of my delegation throughout his mandate. I would also like to express our sincere gratitude and warm congratulations to Dennis Francis, outgoing President of the General Assembly, on the excellent work carried out throughout his term. In addition, I wish to express my most sincere appreciation and full support to Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his leadership and his commitment to a renewed United Nations that is capable of meeting the expectations of the peoples of the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this session, Unity and Diversity for the Advancement of Peace, Sustainable Development, and Human Dignity Everywhere and for Everyone, resonates deeply with the aspirations and challenges that we see in Chad, in Africa, and throughout the world. Promoting peace, sustainable development, and human dignity should not remain a mere slogan or an exercise in rhetoric. This session should inspire us to act with determination and compassion in order to together build a just and peaceful world where every individual and every community can enjoy prosperity and dignity. For Chad, my country, as is the case for many countries in the Sahel, peace remains a major challenge. While we face challenges, it is essential to recognize the efforts being made by our states against terrorist groups whose origins and resources often remain unclear and who threaten our institutions, undermine our development efforts, and aggravate the hardship of our populations. The lack of a genuine collective will on the part of the international community to eradicate the scourge of terrorism in the Sahel risks bringing Africa as a whole into the grip of terrorist groups. We are convinced that a firm commitment is required from the international community in order to tackle this challenge. Together, we must win this battle against terrorism by strengthening our cooperation in order to promote stability on our continent and, as a consequence, that of the shared destiny of humanity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 2030, we will together assess the results of the United Nations Agenda on Sustainable Development. Like many African countries, Chad finds itself at a crossroads of multiple challenges, such as climate change, which threaten our food security. Protracted droughts, desertification, and unpredictable flooding are undermining our economies and hurting vulnerable populations. We therefore call on the international community to honor its commitments on climate financing and climate justice, as well as on the transfer of green technologies. Chad, under the leadership of President Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno, democratically elected based on a well-rounded political program and an ambitious program, and whom I have the distinct honor of representing at this 79th session, has been working tirelessly to improve access to education, safe drinking water, energy, healthcare, and economic opportunities. We must fight poverty and inequality, particularly gender-based inequality, by building a renewed global partnership that recognizes the specific needs of the least developed countries and ensures full inclusion. We ask for equitable access to vaccines as well as to cutting-edge medical technologies, because healthcare and education are the foundations of human dignity. We are likewise determined to promote social inclusion, the empowerment of women and youth, and the protection of human rights. And the support of the international community is essential in this regard. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the future that we are building today will shape the world that we wish to bequeath to future generations. In Chad, our young people, comprising more than 65% of our population, are our greatest wealth. We are investing in their education and their participation in political life in order to prevent our youth from being instrumentalized by radicalism and violent extremism. In addition, we call on the United Nations to support an open labor market and to ensure an environment that allows young people to flourish, because the reason for the migration of African youth is the great divide that separates our states, even though we share a common destiny. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the context of our domestic policy, we are proud of our political transition culminating in free, democratic, and transparent elections, which have resulted in the election of the President of the Republic, Mahamad Idriss Déby Itno, to the presidency of our country for a term of 5 years on May 6th. This milestone reflects our commitment to a peaceful, democratic, and inclusive governance of our country, thus strengthening our democracy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change also represents a major global challenge, with devastating consequences for vulnerable regions such as the Sahel. The recent floods in my country, which have affected more than 1.5 million people, make this reality clear. Given the magnitude of this situation, we call for international solidarity in order to address this emergency. Meanwhile, our country is hosting more than 2 million refugees, which represents nearly 15% of our population. This is placing a heavy burden on our resources and exacerbating the humanitarian emergency. This figure is due to a massive influx of Sudanese refugees caused by the crisis in Sudan, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of refugees coming from other neighboring countries. We call for strengthened solidarity on the part of the international community to support refugees as well as host populations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the ongoing hostilities in Sudan are prolonging the suffering of civilian populations in Sudan and exacerbating the humanitarian situation both in combat zones as well as in neighboring countries such as Chad, which continue to see a daily influx of new refugees. Chad regrets that the numerous appeals for calls for a ceasefire have not been heeded by the warring parties. My country is deeply concerned by the continuation of clashes in Sudan, which further worsen the humanitarian situation as well as its repercussions for neighboring countries, including Chad. Chad once again reiterates its urgent call on the parties to the conflict to immediately cease hostilities and facilitate unhindered humanitarian access to the millions of victims of this fratricidal war, and we urge them to reestablish a political dialogue. Chad remains convinced that the current crisis in Sudan cannot be solved by force. It can only be solved through peaceful means, through an intra-Sudanese dialogue aimed at achieving a lasting peace. Chad reaffirms its support for all initiatives currently underway to restore peace and stability in Sudan. With regard to the Libyan crisis, we call on all the parties to do their utmost to overcome the political impasse in which the country finds itself. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, conflicts are not limited to Africa alone. The situation in Ukraine, as well as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, underscore the dangers of this inexcusable violence, which is claiming untold innocent lives against the backdrop of increasing geopolitical tensions. With regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we strongly condemn the violence and atrocities committed against innocent civilians and reaffirm our commitment to a two-state solution, as well as the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, while calling for a peaceful solution and a negotiated solution to this conflict. The world cannot remain indifferent with a clear conscience, given the horrifying images that we see coming from Gaza and other areas of Palestine. This conflict has now spread to Lebanon, which is worsening the regional situation, and this escalation poses a serious threat to peace and stability, not only for the countries that are directly involved, but for the region as a whole as well. Chad also calls for the lifting of the embargo on Cuba, which harms the country's people and hinders its development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I reaffirm Chad's commitment to the common African position on the reform of the Security Council as laid out in the Azulwini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. We call on the sense of justice and solidarity of all nations to prevail in order to accelerate this much desired and eagerly awaited reform. Africa is asking for nothing more than the redress of a flagrant injustice dealt to an entire continent, a continent with more than 1 billion souls, a continent deprived of its legitimate place in global governance. Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the path towards a future of peace, development, and human dignity is fraught with pitfalls. But it is our collective responsibility to follow that path. To conclude, Chad reiterates its commitment to the founding ideals and principles of the United Nations Charter and urges the international community to strengthen multilateralism in order to build a peaceful world, a world with greater justice, fairness, and solidarity. Thank you for your kind attention.
En nombre de la Asamblea doy las gracias al
We were listening to Allamaye Halina, Prime Minister of the Republic of Chad, during his address at the United Nations General Assembly. In his presentation, the high official referred to the challenges faced by Chad, Africa, and the entire world, that includes fighting terrorism, access to healthcare, education, clean water, and green technologies, and to build a new global partnership that focuses on the specific needs of the poorer nations. He referred to the violent clashes taking place in Sudan that leads to forced displacement, which also impacts the neighboring countries, including Chad. And in this context, he assured that promoting peace should not remain a slogan. This session should inspire us to act to build a just world in which every community can enjoy prosperity, he said. This is all for the moment. Stay tuned with From the South.